The desert didn't burn so much as it breathed heat. It rose from the cracked earth in shimmering waves, lifting into the sky like ghosts made of sunlight. The horizon danced, bending and warping the edges of anything that dared remain still. Even the distant utility poles seemed uncertain of their shape, absorbed into the fever of the Arizona afternoon. The first German shepherd lay collapsed at the base of one of those poles, its ribs rising in stuttered, shallow motions. Every exhale was a rasp, every inhale a question the body wasn't sure it could answer. Its fur, thick by nature, had gone dull with heat and dust. Yet the dog tried to lift itself again, slow, trembling, front legs bracing, muscles quivering with effort. It managed only an inch before collapsing into the dirt once more, a soft thud swallowed immediately by the desert's endless hum. Then came the loop. Lift, tremble, collapse, pause, try again, not toward safety, not toward shade, but toward the thin sliver of shadow, barely large enough to protect a single hand, a shadow currently occupied by 4 tiny bodies, 4 puppies, so small their breaths could barely disturb the dust beneath them. Their paws twitched occasionally. Their ears flicked at flies they were too weak to chase away. Each one looked as if the next gust of wind might scatter them apart. Beside the struggling shepherd lay a second adult. This one didn't move at all, but its final position had meaning. Head angled, jaw slack, neck extended just enough so its silhouette blocked the sun from falling onto the smallest puppy. Even unconscious, or worse, its last instinct had been protection. Wind swept across the asphalt. Hot, bitter wind. It carried grains of sand that pattered against the dog's fur like tiny sparks. Cars passed now and then, engines droning in the distance, their speed fast enough that the people inside never truly saw what lay at the roadside. Heat made suffering invisible here. Anything still enough became part of the landscape. But then a truck slowed. Lucas Merrick didn't immediately understand why his foot eased off the accelerator. He had no reason to stop, no errand, no appointment, no obligation to scan the desert shoulder for shapes half buried in dust. But something tugged at him, low and instinctive, a feeling more than a thought, the kind that reaches the body before it reaches the mind. He glanced into the side mirror. Movement, faint, uncertain, but not random. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. The truck rolled another 20 feet before he finally pulled onto the shoulder. Heat hit him the moment he pushed the door open, a wall of air thick enough to choke on. He took 2 steps forward before the world sharpened. A German shepherd, alive, barely, dragged itself toward the puppies in the sliver of shade. Not to save itself, not to seek comfort, but to block the sun from falling directly on the smallest one. Again, and again, and again. A task too big for its failing strength, but one it repeated with a devotion that ignored exhaustion entirely. Lucas froze, not because he didn't understand what he was seeing, but because he did. Something in that repetitive motion struck a place inside him that hadn't been touched in years, a place that remembered loyalty expressed through unbearable sacrifice. Wind lifted dust into spirals around his feet. The puppies barely stirred. The second adult shepherd didn't move at all. Only the first continued its heartbreaking loop. Lift, collapse, lift, collapse. Lucas exhaled through his teeth, a tight sound swallowed instantly by the heat. He stepped closer. The dog attempted the motion again, legs trembling so violently they carved tiny furrows into the dirt. It collapsed halfway, landing on its side, chest heaving. No sound, no bark, no plea, just breath. Fragile, stubborn breath, insisting on continuing. Lucas felt something inside him shift. Not logic, not duty. Something older, something wordless. He didn't know what kept his feet grounded in that burning patch of desert. He only knew that walking away suddenly felt wrong in a way he could not yet explain. And for reasons he could not name, he stayed. Lucas had never liked the desert. It was too open, too honest, too unwilling to hide anything except suffering. Out here, pain didn't echo the way it did in cities or on bases. It just sank quietly into the heat and stayed there until someone noticed. Most people never did. He stood on the roadside now, sweat already gathering between his shoulder blades, staring at the scene with a growing heaviness in his chest. He didn't move at first. He just took in the details the way a former SEAL instinctively did. The ropes, the angles, the marks on the ground. 2 adult German shepherds, 4 puppies, fresh rope. Knots tied with purpose, skin rubbed raw where the rope had burned fur away. Not a random act, not animals wandering off. Someone had brought them here, tied them here, and walked away knowing the sun would finish what they started. Lucas cursed under his breath and immediately regretted stopping the truck. He wasn't supposed to be dealing with this sort of thing anymore. He wasn't supposed to be stepping into situations that carried weight, complication, or responsibility. He had promised himself that, but promises cracked under the right pressure. He moved closer. The first adult shepherd shifted again, a trembling, agonizing effort to block the sun from the smallest puppy. Lucas crouched, resting his arm on his knee, watching silently. "Damn," he muttered, though the word wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something closer to grief. He reached for the rope binding the dog's foreleg and froze. Not because of the rope, but because the dog flinched, not backward, not in fear, but toward the puppies. Protective, reflexive, even now, even dying. Lucas swallowed the knot that formed in his throat. He didn't want to be part of this. He didn't want the responsibility that came with involvement. He didn't want the memories that were already rising like dust devils behind his ribs. He should have called animal control, should have phoned the sheriff, should have backed away and let the county deal with it. That was the smart move, the safe move, the move he'd sworn he would choose the next time life demanded something heavy of him. His hand drifted toward his phone, but as he reached for it, the smallest puppy twitched. A faint, broken motion, a gasp pretending to be a breath. Lucas froze again, and something inside him, something he thought he'd buried, snapped back awake. He saw the shepherd's eyes, cloudy, drained, but locked onto the puppy with the same intensity Lucas had once seen in soldiers shielding injured teammates during ambushes. The loyalty was unmistakable, the desperation too familiar. Lucas inhaled through clenched teeth. The desert shimmered around him. The sun pressed down like a hand, forcing him into reality. He should have walked away already. He should have been on the road, heading toward anything except this. But his feet didn't move. A memory flickered. Fast, uninvited. A dust-choked alley overseas. A handler's voice hoarse with fear. A shepherd refusing to abandon a wounded man even as the world collapsed around them. He blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. He didn't ask for these dogs. He didn't seek this moment. He wasn't the kind of man who looked for rescues. But sometimes rescues looked for him. He shut his eyes briefly, forcing a slow exhale. Then he opened them and slid his phone back into his pocket. "Damn it," he whispered. He stood, walked to the back of his truck, and popped open the tailgate. Not a decision. Not yet. Just a movement. But movements were the start of everything. He grabbed the emergency kit he always kept near the toolbox. Old habits died loudly. He didn't even remember packing half of what was in the kit, but there it was. Water packs, gauze, trauma shears, electrolyte syringes, cooling gel. He turned back toward the dogs. The shepherd lifted its head an inch, exhausted muscles trembling, but it didn't snarl or pull away. It simply watched him, studied him, decided whether he was threat or help. Lucas crouched again. "Easy," he said under his breath, though he wasn't sure whether he meant the dog or himself. He noticed something else now, the ground around the dogs, the lack of footprints other than his own, the way the dirt had been smoothed deliberately in places, as if someone had tried to mask evidence before leaving. A warning tightened the back of his neck. Whoever dumped these dogs didn't want them found. Not alive, at least. He pushed the thought aside. He couldn't chase shadows right now. The puppies needed more immediate attention. He dipped his fingers in water, letting a few drops fall onto the driest pup's nose. Its tongue lifted weakly, catching a bead before drifting back into stillness. "That's it," Lucas murmured. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. He wasn't supposed to feel this. But the adult shepherd attempted another shift, slow, painful, determined. It nudged its body again toward the shade the puppies shared. Its legs collapsed halfway through the motion, and it slumped against the dirt. That was the moment Lucas felt something inside him crack. This wasn't just instinct. This was devotion. This was a vow the dog was keeping even as its body failed. He whispered, almost without thinking, "I've seen this before." The desert didn't answer. It didn't need to. His decision wasn't spoken. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even conscious. One moment he was watching. The next, his hands were lifting the trauma shears. The next, he was cutting the rope. The next, he wasn't walking away anymore. He caught the shepherd gently as the rope loosened, lowering its head to the ground so the sudden release didn't jolt its neck. He checked the puppy's breathing again. Weak, but there. As he worked, the wind shifted, carrying a faint whisper of heat deeper into the roadside ditch. A car passed by but did not slow. The world continued as if this moment didn't exist. But Lucas stayed, and though he couldn't explain the feeling rising through his chest, thick and old and heavy as memory, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever was happening here wasn't over, and he was already part of it. Heat had its own sound in the Arizona desert, a faint hiss, like the world exhaling through clenched teeth. Lucas felt it crawling across his skin as he knelt beside the tangled bodies of the two German shepherds. The sun hammered down so hard it felt personal, as if it resented anyone trying to survive below it. He checked the smallest puppy again, still breathing, but shallow. Too shallow. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, not sure if he was talking to the pup or himself. His shirt was already drenched with sweat, sticking to his back as he tugged the trauma shears along the second dog's rope. Each fiber snapped with a brittle pop, leaving indentations on the animal's fur that made Lucas's stomach tighten. Marks like those didn't come from panic or accident. They came from intention, from someone who wanted these dogs to suffer before they died. The final rope fell away, and the unconscious shepherd slumped heavily to the side. Dust puffed up in a thin cloud. Lucas slid his hands under its jaw and shoulder to ease the drop, but the dog didn't stir, not even a twitch. He leaned over, placing two fingers gently against its ribcage. A faint beat pressed back. Weak, irregular, but present. "Still here," he murmured. The conscious shepherd, barely conscious at this point, shifted again. Its front paw scraped the dirt in a trembling arc towards the puppies. Its nails dragged weakly, but determination radiated from the motion. Lucas watched, unable to look away. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't training. It was something deeper, an unbreakable thread of loyalty that refused to snap even when the body gave out. He had seen that kind of loyalty before, and once again, it tied a knot inside his chest. He shook the thought off and reached for a water pack. Carefully, he squeezed a thin trickle onto the mother's gums. The dog didn't react at first. Then its tongue flicked, catching the moisture. "That's it," Lucas whispered. "Stay with me." But he wasn't winning yet, not even close. The smallest pup let out a sound soft, thin, almost imaginary. Its chest seized once, then shuddered. Lucas lifted it with both hands, feeling the terrifying lightness of its body. Puppies were supposed to be warm, soft, full of clumsy energy. This one was limp, as if the sun had wrung the life out of it. He pressed it gently against his chest. His heartbeat thumped against its tiny rib cage, steady and sure. "Come on," he whispered again. "Not your time." He angled himself to give the pup shade, using his own body to block the sun. Sweat dripped into his eyebrows. He wiped it away with the back of his wrist. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The sheriff's office? Animal control? A way out? He didn't reach for it. Because even if he called now, nobody would make it here in time. Out in the desert, help is on the way meant help will arrive after the damage is done. No, this was on him. He just hadn't admitted it yet. The conscious shepherd suddenly pushed itself upward again. Its legs buckled immediately, but the effort was enough to send a wobbling, defiant bark into the scorching air. A warning, a plea, a refusal to give up. Lucas stared at the dog. The pup pressed against his chest, the smell of sun-baked earth filling his lungs. This moment wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't something he could just forget or drive away from. He felt it, the shift, a weight settling into place, a decision forming not from logic, but from something old and scarred inside him. His hands tightened around the puppy. "No one's coming," he whispered. The wind responded with a low, sweeping rush. He looked between the two adult dogs, the 4 pups, the ropes cut and scattered around his boots. He could still leave. He could still pretend he hadn't seen any of this. He could still protect the fragile peace he'd been trying to build after years of chaos. But peace built on walking away wasn't peace at all. It was avoidance. It was cowardice dressed as self-preservation. And Lucas Merrick had never survived a single deployment by avoiding the hard things. A truck roared by in the distance, not slowing, not noticing. The world kept going, indifferent. Lucas didn't. "Okay," he whispered finally, the word barely audible. "Okay, I'm in." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was binding. He moved fast now, not panicked but decisive. He set the smallest puppy inside his open shirt to keep it warm but shielded from the sun. He lifted each pup carefully, checking for dehydration, checking for heat stroke, checking for hope. He soaked the edge of his shirt with water to cool their paws. He slid jackets and blankets from the truck to create makeshift shade. He positioned the adult shepherds so they wouldn't collapse onto the pups. Each action was small, but each one pulled him deeper into a fight he could no longer walk away from. When the last puppy lay safely on the cloth-covered floor of his truck, Lucas stepped back, breathing hard. The desert seemed to hush around him, waiting. This was no longer just a rescue. This was an intervention, maybe even a confrontation. Someone did this. Someone who didn't want these dogs alive. Someone who might come looking. Lucas scanned the horizon, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "If you come back," he murmured to the empty desert, "you'll find me waiting." He gathered the last of the supplies, checking the dogs one more time. Then he lifted the conscious shepherd into his arms. It didn't resist. Instead, it lowered its head against his shoulder, too exhausted to do anything else. Lucas felt the breath hitch in his chest. This dog trusted him, completely, blindly, immediately. He closed his eyes. "You shouldn't," he whispered, "but you do." And with that, he committed fully past the point of return. Lucas Merrick, who had sworn he was done saving anyone, carried all 6 dogs into his truck. The desert watched him go, and somewhere deep inside, for the first time in a long time, something in Lucas shifted, not healed, but started. The desert highway unfurled ahead of Lucas like a strip of white fire, rippling in the heat. His truck groaned under the weight of 6 fragile lives. 2 adult German shepherds and 4 pups huddled in blankets across the back seat. The air conditioning fought a losing battle, sputtering coolness that barely dented the furnace beyond the windshield. But Lucas barely noticed the heat. His mind had already drifted somewhere hotter, harsher, and infinitely farther away. He had seen this before. Not the desert, not the dogs, but the way survival looked when it was running out of time. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The smallest puppy was wrapped inside his open shirt, resting against his heartbeat. Every few minutes, Lucas pressed 2 fingers to its ribs, counting breaths he feared might vanish if he didn't watch closely enough. "You're okay," he whispered. "Stay with me." The desert wind roared outside, lifting sand into curling ghosts that danced across the road. It sounded too much like the sandstorms overseas, ruthless, unrelenting, swallowing everything in their path. And that was all it took. Memory opened like a door he'd tried for years to nail shut. He was suddenly 29 again, sweat stinging his eyes beneath a battered helmet, the world around him painted in the rust-red palette of a far more hostile desert. Bullets cracked somewhere in the smoke. A Black Hawk circled above, too cautious to land. And in the center of the chaos, a German shepherd named Rocco stood over a wounded medic. Rocco wasn't trained to leave. He wasn't trained to abandon anyone. Even when the medic lost consciousness, even when flames licked the edges of the blown-out wall behind them, even when handlers shouted for retreat, Rocco stayed. And Lucas remembered screaming into the comms, voice breaking, begging the pilot to dip lower, to return, to not leave them behind. But sometimes deserts took decisions away. Sometimes the world didn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes leaving someone wasn't betrayal, it was the only way the living survived. The rotor wash had kicked sand into Lucas's mouth as they lifted. His last sight of the ground was Rocco's silhouette curved protectively over the medic's body, framed by heat and smoke. He never forgot that shape, never forgot the weight of surviving when loyalty held someone else in place. A horn blared somewhere behind him, snapping him back to the present. He blinked hard, forcing the memory down, shoving it back into the corner where he'd kept it buried. The road snapped back into focus. The desert now, not the desert then. But the parallels clung to him like dust. The adult shepherd lying weakly across his back seat had made the same impossible choice. Stay when the body said go. Protect when survival said run. That kind of loyalty wasn't learned. It wasn't taught. It was something carved into the soul. Lucas glanced in the rearview mirror. The conscious shepherd he'd begun thinking of her as the mother was awake now, head lifting an inch every so often, eyes half open, checking on each pup with the vigilance of a soldier doing roll call. The unconscious adult still hadn't stirred. For a moment, the truck, the heat, the silence, they all faded beneath the echo of rotor blades from a lifetime ago. He swallowed. He wasn't losing these dogs. Not again. Not this time. He signaled and took the exit toward Red Willow Crossing, a tiny desert town with a population small enough that gossip traveled faster than weather. But this wasn't about people. This was about Maggie Rowe. Maggie was one of the few vets Lucas trusted. She had worked with military canines before until politics and paperwork pushed her out. She knew trauma. She knew dehydration thresholds, heat stroke timelines, electrolyte crash symptoms, and she didn't look away from ugly truths the way others did. As Lucas turned down the worn 2-lane road toward her clinic, A gust of burning wind slapped the truck hard, rattling the doors. The sky browned for a moment, dust rising like a curtain. He exhaled through his teeth. "Feels the same," he muttered. "Different place. Same fight." The puppy inside his shirt twitched faintly. Lucas pressed a steady hand over it, letting his voice soften. "Not losing you. Not today." The heat shimmer outside intensified, bending the horizon until the world looked warped like the view through rising smoke. The air felt too thick, too familiar. He couldn't escape the comparison now. The desert wasn't just hot, it was punishing. It was testing him again. But this time, the test wasn't gunfire or enemy lines. It was a question. Would he keep driving, like he once had, forced to abandon a life he couldn't save? Or would he stop the spiral here, with these dogs, in this forgotten corner of Arizona? He reached the clinic. A faded sign read, "Maggie Rowe, DVM." The parking lot was empty. The building small, sun-beaten, but alive. Lucas parked beneath a mesquite tree, killed the engine, and listened to the truck tick as it cooled. His heart didn't cool with it. It thudded too loudly in his chest, tied to memories he'd spent years avoiding, and the fragile breaths of 6 dogs depending on him right now. He checked the rear again. The mother shepherd stared back at him, tired, trembling, but alive. Her gaze locked with his, and something quiet passed between them. Not trust, recognition, as if she saw the weight in him, as if she knew he'd carried it before. Lucas took the smallest puppy from inside his shirt, holding it close as he opened the truck door. Heat slammed him again, wrapping him in a wave that felt disturbingly like that foreign desert. But this was Arizona. This was now. These lives weren't slipping away yet. He whispered, almost to himself, not repeating that day. Not ever. Then he gathered the pups, lifted the exhausted shepherds with all the care of a man carrying memory itself, and pushed into Maggie Rowe's clinic. Outside, the desert wind howled. Inside, the past finally met the present, and Lucas knew the line between them had begun to blur. Maggie Rowe had the kind of presence that made a room feel steadier the second she stepped into it. Her hands were quick, precise, unflinching hands that knew too much and had seen more than most veterinarians ever would. When Lucas pushed through the door of her clinic carrying the smallest puppy against his chest, those steady hands froze for only half a second. Then she moved. "Get them in here," she said, voice sharp in a way that meant urgency, not panic. She held the clinic door with her elbow so Lucas could bring the adult shepherds inside. The unconscious one sagged heavily in his arms. The mother collapsed the moment her paws touched the cool tile. Maggie knelt immediately, fingers at the mother's gums, then her belly, then her pulse. Severe dehydration, electrolyte crash, some internal bruising. "Lucas, what happened out there?" He didn't answer right away. He laid each puppy gently across the padded table, and only once they were stable did he meet her eyes. They were tied up, left in the sun. Maggie's jaw clenched. All of them? Someone didn't intend for them to survive. She stood abruptly, motioning him to follow. "Help me with fluids." For the next 20 minutes, the clinic was filled with the quiet rhythm of crisis. IV bags rustling, syringes clicking, shallow breaths from animals fighting to stay alive. Lucas held the pups steady as Maggie inserted needles no thicker than sewing pins into fragile veins. He felt every tremor of their small bodies, every slight improvement, every failing. When the smallest puppy whimpered weakly, Maggie exhaled in slow relief. "That's good. That's a very good sign." But the relief didn't last long. Once the immediate crisis settled into a fragile stability, Maggie walked to a locked cabinet. She pulled out a clipboard with a stack of intake forms, standard procedure. But the moment she flipped to the second page, her posture changed. Her voice dropped. "Lucas, look at this." He hadn't seen that expression on her face since Afghanistan years ago, in a field tent when she'd been consulting for a canine unit and discovered something she wasn't supposed to. Lucas stepped closer. Maggie lifted the mother's lip slightly. "Look at the tattoo on her gum line. That sequence isn't random. And the microchip? Registered to a facility called Western Tactical K9. That sounds like a training center." "It is," Maggie said. "A big one. Used to supply working dogs for police departments and private security contractors." Lucas felt a cold thread unravel in his spine. "So how do they end up here? Tied in the desert?" Maggie hesitated. That alone was a warning. "Some facilities," she began slowly, choosing her words with care, "don't like paying long-term costs. Medical issues, pregnancy, age, temperament changes. And instead of retiring the dogs properly finding adopters, they falsify paperwork." Lucas stared. "Meaning?" "Meaning some dogs get labeled as unfit for service." Her voice flattened. "Officially euthanized, unofficially dumped." Lucas swore under his breath. Maggie continued, quieter now. "I refused to sign off on one of those discards 3 years ago. You remember, I reported it." She gave a bitter laugh. "I was out of that job within a month." Silence pressed on the room like the heat outside. Lucas looked at the unconscious shepherd. "So someone didn't want this pair, or these pups?" Maggie nodded. "And someone expected no one to find them." Lucas crossed his arms, energy tightening through him. "We need to report this." "I already called the county office," Maggie said, rubbing the back of her neck. "Guess what they said?" Lucas didn't have to guess. "Probably just strays." "Exactly. They don't want a fight with a private contracting facility. They don't want headlines. They want the problem to stay small." Lucas paced the room once, then twice. "They're hoping we drop it." "Yes." Maggie's voice softened. "Lucas, you don't have to get involved. I know you just wanted to help the dogs. You've been through enough. You came home to rest." Rest. The word tasted like sand. Lucas looked at the dogs, the smallest pup's chest rising and falling against the towel. He looked at the mother shepherd, still trembling but alive. He looked at the unconscious dog, ribs showing, paws cracked. He'd seen soldiers with that same kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from fighting alone for too long. Maggie stepped closer. "If we push this, it becomes political. It becomes dangerous. For you, for me, for the clinic." Lucas didn't answer. His jaw flexed. "You don't owe anyone anything anymore," she added gently. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Maggie," he said slowly, "leaving them would have been easier." She held his gaze, breath catching. "But easier doesn't mean right." The room fell silent. Maggie nodded once, the decision forming between them like a pact. "Then we don't look away." Lucas exhaled, the weight heavy but chosen. "We're reporting this. Higher than county. Someone will listen." "And if they don't?" Maggie asked quietly. Lucas looked at the mother shepherd, her eyes barely open but watching her pups with unbroken devotion. "Then we make them." Outside, the desert wind rattled the clinic windows, hot, restless, unforgiving. Inside, something had begun that neither of them could undo. The moment wasn't loud, it wasn't heroic, but it was a line in the sand. And Lucas Merrick had just stepped across it. The desert didn't cool after sunset, it simply changed shape. The heat slid off the roads and hid in the rocks, waiting for morning. By the time Lucas reached the clinic-turned haven, the sky was black enough to swallow the horizon. But the air still felt thick, restless. Inside the old garage Maggie's father once used, the rescued dogs slept on blankets. The two adult shepherds lay closest to the door, instincts still sharp even in exhaustion. The puppies, nestled in a padded crate, breathed in soft, staggered rhythms stronger than yesterday but still fragile, like candles not yet safe from the wind. Lucas stood near the metal door, arms folded, every nerve in his body tuned to some unseen frequency. Something wasn't right. He felt it the way he used to feel IEDs under foreign soil, an electric tension beneath silence. Maggie noticed. "You're pacing," she said. Lucas hadn't realized he was. "Tracks out on the road. Someone came back earlier." She set down the syringe she was prepping. "The men who tied the dogs? Or the men who paid them?" Lucas said quietly. The thought hung between them like static. Before Maggie could answer, a low hum drifted through the desert. Not wind, not far off traffic. An engine, moving slow. Lucas stepped to the crack in the door. Headlights floated through the scrub brush, slow, surveying, deliberate. A truck rolled into view. Dark-colored, tinted windows, the kind that liked shadows. He didn't breathe until the engine cut off. Footsteps crunched over gravel. Two men, both heavy, both confident. Men who came to collect what they believed they owned. Lucas moved in front of Maggie, instincts snapping into place like a rifle bolt. "Stay behind me." One of the men laughed as he approached the door. "Easy, big guy. We just came for our property." Maggie's whisper trembled. Property? They left them to die. The man shrugged with the ease of someone who'd done worse. "We don't pay you to understand. We pay you to get out of the way." Lucas didn't move. The taller man stepped closer, squinting into the dim garage. He saw the crates, the puppies, the adult shepherd lying with its head protectively angled over them. His lips curled. "Move." Lucas remained stone still. The man lunged. Lucas caught the motion from the corner of his eye and reacted before thinking, one shove to Maggie to get her clear, one pivot to block the doorway. The man slammed into him, a full-body hit that drove fire through Lucas's shoulder. He gritted his teeth, but stayed upright. Then a fist came out of nowhere, fast, mean, precise. It hammered into Lucas's injured shoulder. Pain shot white-hot down his arm. His vision wavered for half a second. Enough time for the second man to grab him from the side. They drove him into the concrete floor. His shoulder struck hard. The pain was blinding, a ripping flash that made his breath seize. The taller man reared back to strike again. Then a bark, sharp and broken, cut through the chaos. Not a strong bark, not a warning bark, a bark made from the last thread of strength left in a dying body. The conscious adult shepherd, still gaunt, still trembling, dragged itself upright. Each movement looked like it cost pieces of its life. But it stood anyway, planting its paws between Lucas and the men, swaying but refusing to fall. The tall man groaned in annoyance. "Oh, come on! That thing's still alive?" He lifted his boot. Lucas's stomach dropped. "Don't!" But the dog didn't flinch. It leaned forward, teeth bared, not in threat, but in devotion. A vow given in silence. "Over my body." The man swung his leg. Lucas surged forward, ignoring the pain ripping through his shoulder. He crashed into the man's waist, tackling him into a shelf of rusted tools. Metal clattered and rained around them. The second man grabbed Lucas from behind, trying to pull him off. The shepherd lunged, not strong enough to bite, not coordinated enough to land the hit, but enough to break the man's focus. Its paws scraped the floor, body collapsing mid-lunge. The dog hit the ground with a dull thud. A whine escaped thin, heart-splitting. Maggie cried out, "Stop, please! The puppies!" No one listened. Dust filled the air. Fists swung. Lucas's shoulder screamed. The men grunted as Lucas slammed one into a wall, using leverage to make up for strength he didn't have. Then, sirens, not far off, not maybe. Right outside. Red and blue lights exploded through the cracks in the garage door. "Sheriff's Department! Hands where we can see them!" The men froze. Deputies stormed the garage, forcing both attackers to the ground. Handcuffs clicked. Someone cursed. Someone breathed heavy. Lucas stayed kneeling, chest heaving, shoulder blazing with pain. As soon as the men were dragged out, Maggie sprinted to the collapsed shepherd. She knelt beside it, hands on its ribs. "It's alive," she whispered. "Just spent everything it had." Lucas lowered himself beside them. The dog's chest rose and fell in shallow waves. Its muzzle twitched weakly toward the crate where the puppies whimpered. Even dying, it was still trying to protect them. Sheriff Ben Caldwell stepped forward, scanning the room, the ropes, the crates, the overturned shelves, Lucas's battered state. "Hell of a mess,"
This is what peace feels
he muttered.
like.
Lucas didn't look up. "Another 2 minutes and you'd be zipping bodies?" Caldwell sighed. "Glad you stayed here then?" Stayed. The word lodged itself painfully in Lucas's chest. He didn't stay because he wanted a fight. He didn't stay because he thought he could win. He stayed because that dog stood up on legs made of nothing but willpower. Because those puppies believed someone would come. Because Maggie believed justice mattered. Because the desert was no place for the voiceless to die unseen. Caldwell rested a hand on his holster. "These men belong to something bigger, don't they?" Lucas finally looked him in the eye. "Yes, and this won't be the last time they try to clean their tracks." The sheriff nodded solemnly. "Then we better start pulling every thread." Maggie stroked the shepherd's head as its breathing steadied, still fragile, still faint, but fighting. Lucas touched the dog gently under its jaw. "You held the line," he whispered. The dog's eyes fluttered, registering his voice. It wasn't thanks. It wasn't acknowledgement. It was simply truth. This dog did not survive because someone saved it. It survived because it refused to stop. And in that moment, Lucas understood something he hadn't allowed himself to face since the war. He didn't stay tonight out of obligation. He stayed because someone had to, because someone finally did. Morning crept into Red Willow Crossing without hurry, spreading pale gold across the ridge lines and the cracked road where everything had begun. The desert was quiet, deceptively quiet. No wind, no traffic, no voices, only the low hum of cicadas warming under the sun. Inside the old garage where the rescue had unfolded, the air felt different, still tense, but no longer dangerous. The adrenaline had burned off, replaced by something heavier. Consequences. Lucas sat on an overturned bucket near the doorway, shoulder wrapped, shirt torn at the seam. The 2 deputies who had hauled the attackers away had returned for photographs and statements. Sheriff Ben Caldwell stood in the shade, sleeves rolled, hat pushed back, as he surveyed the scene through a practiced, steady gaze. Maggie hovered near the adult shepherd that had collapsed after defending them. Her hands moved in small circles over its ribcage, like she could will its lungs to expand deeper, stronger. The puppies whimpered inside their crate, but even they seemed to sense the shift in the world around them. Something had ended last night, and something else had begun. Caldwell knelt near the tire tracks Lucas had pointed out earlier, the ones still stamped into the dirt like a signature someone hoped would go unnoticed. "Same tread as the truck we impounded," he said. "They circled the scene hours before they attacked." "So they came to check if the job was finished," Lucas replied. Caldwell gave him a grim nod. "People who do things like this, they like things simple, quiet, untraceable." Lucas stared out at the desert, jaw tightening. They weren't expecting anyone to stop. "No," Caldwell agreed. "They weren't." He rose slowly, dusting off his hands. Age had carved itself into the lines of his face, but not into the way he carried himself. He had the look of a man who'd seen the worst kinds of trouble and knew when something ugly ran deeper than its surface. "We'll need statements," he said. "Photos, medical reports, everything." Lucas understood. This wasn't about arresting two thugs. This was the beginning of unearthing a system that preferred to run dark. He glanced toward Maggie. She looked exhausted but resolute, the weight of last night sitting on her shoulders like a mantle she hadn't asked for, but refused to shrug off. She stroked the shepherd's ear gently. "They'll live," she said softly. "Barely. But they will." Lucas let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Caldwell joined them, removing his hat out of respect, an old habit he probably didn't notice himself doing.
They weren't the first victims.
"Dr. Rowe, we'll need your records. Anything unusual you've seen in the last year?" Maggie hesitated.
We push.
"Sheriff, I've sent reports before. Nothing was ever done." Caldwell looked at her, something steady in his eyes. This time there's no ignoring it.
Silence is not an option.
Because now it wasn't paperwork. It wasn't rumors. It wasn't an anonymous tip or a concerned citizen. It was blood on the concrete, rope burns on living skin, illegal disposal, assault, intent to kill, and a former SEAL willing to testify. Maggie swallowed. "I'll do whatever you need." Caldwell nodded, once quiet, decisive. The deputies loaded the seized items into evidence bags. The rope, the cut harness fragments, the syringes and blank transfer papers found in the attacker's truck. None of it was dramatic. None of it was flashy. Just methodical gathering of truth. Some forms of justice arrive with courtroom speeches and headlines. This wasn't going to be one of those. This was the kind that happens behind closed doors. On phone lines. In investigations no one hears about until long after they're done. Quiet justice. And yet, Lucas felt it, deep in his bones, the slow cracking of something rotten being exposed to the sun. By noon, Caldwell had left with his deputies, the arrested men, and enough evidence to force a state-level review. The dust their convoy kicked up hung in the air long after they disappeared down the road. Maggie sat beside Lucas on the porch of the clinic, elbows on her knees. "They won't face big charges," she said. "Maybe fines, maybe probation." "Probably," Lucas said. "And the contracting facility?" Maggie sighed. "They'll deny everything until the paperwork forces their hand." "Probably," he repeated. "So this isn't justice," she murmured. Lucas leaned back, letting the wind push warm air across his face. "Depends on how you define justice." Maggie looked at him, waiting. He continued, voice low but sure. "Punishment is loud. Fixing things is quiet. One gets attention. The other actually changes something." She considered that, eyes drifting towards the shepherd now sleeping peacefully on a blanket inside. "The dogs won't know any of this happened. They don't need to," Lucas said. "They just needed someone to do the right thing." Maggie's shoulders eased for the first time since dawn. Later that afternoon, Rachel Ortega from Animal Control arrived with a clipboard and an apologetic expression. She'd heard the sheriff's version of events and came ready to correct every oversight her department had ignored. "These dogs shouldn't have slipped through the cracks," she admitted, scanning the paperwork Maggie had saved. "This program should have been audited 6 months ago." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "So what happens now?" Rachel clicked her pen, determination carving itself into her features. "Now, we open every file, every transfer, every disposal order, and we pull every dog that shouldn't be on that list." "How many is that?" Maggie asked quietly. "More than I'd like to admit," Rachel replied, "but less than it will be if we start now." It wasn't triumphant, it wasn't cinematic, it was simply right. For the next week, the process rolled forward, not as a tidal wave, but as a steady, unstoppable tide. Licenses suspended, euthanasia orders halted, Dogs re-evaluated, records corrected, shelters notified, funding reviewed. No headlines, no applause, no cheering crowds. Just a quiet dismantling of a system that had failed animals who'd been trained to give everything. And beneath all of it was the beating heart of one truth. Someone finally refused to walk away. One evening, after the clinic had closed and the rescued dogs were resting, Sheriff Caldwell stopped by again. He didn't come with paperwork. He didn't come with warnings. He simply stood beside Lucas under the porch light. "Most people who see a mess this big step back," Caldwell said. "You stepped forward." Lucas shook his head. "I didn't go looking for this, Sheriff." Caldwell smiled faintly. "Funny thing about justice, it usually finds the people willing to carry it." They stood there in comfortable silence until the sheriff added, "You did good, son." When he left, the air felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something long ignored had finally been noticed. Inside, the shepherd who had stood between Lucas and danger lifted its head, eyes soft but alive. Maggie stroked its muzzle gently. "They'll never know what they stopped," she whispered. Lucas crouched beside them. "They don't need to." Justice didn't roar that week. It didn't threaten, it didn't punish in fury, it simply arrived quiet, steady, unshakable. And it stayed. The desert did not announce the change of season, it never did. It simply shifted, almost imperceptibly, from a punishing furnace to a quieter heat that felt less like a warning and more like a reminder. Mornings grew calmer, nights settled sooner. And the sun, though still unrelenting at noon, no longer pressed down with the weight of something trying to break the land apart. 3 months had passed since the day Lucas Merrick pulled over on the forgotten stretch of road. Enough time for the desert to reclaim the tracks left there. Enough time for the wind to smooth the scars in the dust. Enough time for everything to look, on the surface, as if nothing had happened at all. But at the edge of Red Willow Crossing, something had changed for good. A small wooden sign now stood at the front of the once abandoned lot. Red Willow Haven, Rescue and Rehabilitation. The letters were simple, hand-painted, without decoration or flourish. They didn't need any. The building behind them told the rest of the story. A new roof, hammered in place under the scorching July sun. Fresh paint across old siding. A row of kennels built from donated materials, lined in soft bedding. Maggie insisted on sewing herself. Shade cloth stretched across the yard, anchored by poles, Lucas straightened one by one. A water station built from old trough scraps. None of it fancy. All of it chosen with care. Inside the main room, morning light filtered through clean windows, falling over 2 German shepherds who no longer resembled the ghosts they had once been. Their coats had filled back in, thick and dark. Their ribs were no longer visible. Their breathing was strong. Their posture, once a trembling, collapsing effort, was steady and confident again. The larger shepherd, the one who had stood between Lucas and the puppies, despite being moments from collapse, now walked with the authority of a dog who understood the boundaries of its new home. It sniffed the air, checked the corners, then circled back to Maggie, brushing its shoulder gently against her knee. The second shepherd, the one that had lain motionless beneath the desert sun but angled its head to shade the smallest pup, moved with a slower but deliberate pace. It had regained its strength, though not without the faint limp that remained from old injuries. Lucas suspected it would always walk that way. He didn't see it as broken. He saw it as earned. Maggie crouched between them, rubbing her palms along their necks. The dogs leaned into her without hesitation. They no longer flinched at touch. They no longer fought to stay upright. They simply existed safe, grounded, whole enough to let their bodies soften under her hands. In her office, pinned neatly above the desk, were 4 photographs. The puppies, now months old, lived scattered across Arizona with families Maggie had personally vetted. Ranger sprawled belly up across a child's lap. Luna curled in a basket overflowing with toys. Jasper racing across a yard with an elderly man laughing behind him. And Scout perched proudly beside a retired officer on a hiking trail. Each picture was a reminder that healing could ripple outward, that something abandoned could become something cherished, that a life nearly erased could become a life that shaped another family. Outside, the gravel crunched beneath boots. Lucas crossed the yard with a wooden post balanced across his shoulder, the kind of post used for reinforcing perimeter fencing. He walked with the quiet steadiness of a man who no longer rushed to the next destination. His shirt was streaked with dust. His hair was sun-bleached in places he hadn't noticed. But the tension that once lived in his posture, tight, ready, unsettled, had loosened. He set the post into the earth, adjusting it until it stood straight. The shepherds watched him work, not with anxiety but with expectation. They knew his movements now. They knew the rhythm of his presence. They trotted toward him, stopping just close enough for their shadows to fall across his boots. Lucas knelt and scratched behind their ears. "You two checking my work again?" They didn't need to answer. Their tails sweeping the dirt in slow arcs were enough. He'd never said he was staying. He'd never sat Maggie down and declared anything permanent. But he kept showing up each morning before the sun crested the ridge. He fixed gates, repaired hoses, built an intake pen, walked the dogs in the quiet hour before the town awoke, ate lunch on the porch without mentioning leaving, filled water troughs, patched a roof leak, returned every evening without fail. Sometimes healing was not a decision. Sometimes it was a pattern. After securing the fence line, he moved toward the porch where a pair of wooden chairs waited in the shade. He didn't sit right away. He stood still for a moment, hands resting on the back of the chair, scanning the yard the way someone once trained to assess perimeters. Habit, not fear. When he finally lowered himself into the chair, the dogs lay on either side of him, forming the same protective semicircle they had once formed around their puppies. Except now, the posture wasn't desperate. It was simply familiar. Maggie stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 glasses of iced water. She set one beside him. "Fence looks good." He nodded. "Dogs supervised." She smiled, a tired, content kind of smile, the smile of someone who had fought long enough to appreciate the value of quiet. "You ever going to admit you live here now?" she asked. Lucas breathed out slowly, watching the sky shift from sharp blue to softer shades as the afternoon deepened. "Maybe when I believe it." "And now?" He considered the question, not rushing an answer. There had been a time his mind replayed failures in endless loops, a time desert heat brought back old rotors and old smoke, a time his hands shook when he wasn't holding a weapon or a purpose. But that had changed. Now he woke to the sound of dogs stretching in their kennels. He spent afternoons with a hammer instead of ghosts. He ended his days on a porch that didn't feel temporary. "Now," he said quietly, "I don't feel like running." The shepherd closest to him lifted its head and rested it on his knee. He let his hand drift to its fur, grounding himself in a calm that didn't feel borrowed anymore. Maggie sat beside him. "They're alive because you stopped that day." Lucas didn't respond. He watched the horizon instead, the way desert light softened when the sun began to sink. He wasn't thinking of the day he stopped. He was thinking of the days after, the ones that came without chaos, the ones that asked nothing of him except presence, the ones that taught him that survival and peace weren't opposites. Wind moved through the yard, stirring the shade cloth, rattling the gravel, brushing against the untouched sign. A season ago, this place was empty. Now it was enough. Stories rarely move through the desert with speed. They drift, they settle. They take root in places no one expects and grow in ways no one predicts. And in Red Willow Crossing, a town small enough that everyone recognized the sound of everyone else's truck, Lucas Merrick's story moved exactly that way. It began quietly, almost accidentally. Sheriff Ben Caldwell mentioned it one morning at the diner, while stirring sugar into coffee that had been saved too long on the burner. Someone had asked why deputies were out near the old highway that Sunday, and Caldwell, not one for embellishment, offered the simplest version he could. A man stopped when no one else did, and 2 German shepherds shielded their puppies in the burning desert until help finally came. He didn't give the details. He didn't speak of heat waves or surgical scars or the thin line between life and loss. He didn't mention Lucas by name. But he didn't have to. The people sitting near him understood that something unusual had happened. Something that did not fit neatly into the tired rhythm of an Arizona morning. Stories travel faster than truth. But this one carried truth inside it, and so it traveled well. By the end of the week, children at Red Willow Elementary were repeating pieces of it on playground swings. By the end of the month, pastors referenced it in sermons about compassion. And by the time summer tilted toward fall, nearly every resident of Red Willow Crossing had been touched by it in some way, often without realizing how their neighbor heard a different version. At the school, Mrs. Hanley used the story in a unit on courage, not the dramatic, hero saves the day kind, but the quiet, stubborn courage of choosing kindness when silence would be easier. She wrote 3 words on the board: choice, cost, care. Then she told her students about the shepherds who stayed when the world walked away, and the man who refused to keep driving. Her students, 9 and 10 years old, restless and curious, asked questions adults rarely dared to voice. Why didn't other cars stop? Were the puppies scared? Did the dogs know what they were doing? How did the man know he should help? When she admitted that courage doesn't announce itself, and sometimes people only realize they're brave after the moment has already passed, the room fell into a deeper kind of listening, the kind that lingers. Soon after, the story made its way into homes. Children repeated it at dinner tables. Parents nodded, thoughtful. Grandparents leaned in closer, remembering their own moments of choosing kindness when no one was watching. At the Red Willow Crossing Cafe, someone taped a handwritten sign above the counter. If 2 dogs can protect 4 lives, maybe we can protect 1. Customers left extra sandwiches for the rescue. Someone slipped a 20 into the donation jar without signing a name. Someone else offered old lumber in case Lucas needs it for the fence. The town did not change loudly. It changed gently. It changed together. Red Willow Haven, once just a patched-up building on a forgotten lot, became something different. Not a shelter, not a clinic. A place where people learned how to pay attention again. Families visited to walk the rescue dogs. Retired carpenters fixed loose boards without being asked. Teenagers came after school to refill water stations. A group of seniors crocheted blankets for the intake kennels. Farmers brought broken bales of hay, shaking their heads like the dogs were the ones doing them a favor. People began stopping by just to sit on the bench outside the door, to talk with Maggie, to watch Lucas work with the shepherds, whose loyalty had softened into a quiet trust that radiated across the yard. For Lucas, the attention felt strange, almost uncomfortable. He didn't see himself the way others did. When he carried feed bags or unloaded supplies or coaxed a nervous dog into accepting a gentle touch, he moved as if he were invisible, as if the work mattered, but he didn't. But the town noticed him anyway. They saw how the shepherds followed him like twin shadows. They saw how he positioned himself automatically between danger and gentleness, even when danger was only a wobbly gate hinge. They saw how he always stepped aside when thanked, as though gratitude belonged to someone else. People began calling him something quietly, respectfully, never to his face. The quiet protector. Not because he talked about bravery, not because he sought recognition, but because he embodied a kind of steadiness the town didn't realize it had been missing. At a community meeting that September, Maggie was asked to speak about responsible animal care. She arrived with a notebook and a nervous smile, but when she faced the room, filled with neighbors, volunteers, and children, she set the notes aside. She told them about the 2 German shepherds, not in a dramatic way, not to make anyone cry, but the way you tell a truth that deserves to be remembered. She described the heat, the ropes, the way the adult dogs shielded their young, the way their bodies carved out a small patch of protection in a place that offered none. She didn't mention Lucas until someone in the back asked, "And the man who found them, what happened to him?" Dozens of eyes turned to where Lucas stood near the doorway, hat in hand, not expecting the attention and visibly unsure what to do with it. Maggie answered before he could. "He didn't do it for recognition," she said. "He just refused to look away." The room fell silent, not the empty kind, but the full kind that forms when people learn something about themselves through someone else's story. When the meeting ended, no one approached Lucas directly. They simply smiled at him the way people smile at someone who has quietly made their world better. Red Willow Crossing did not build monuments or name streets. They did something simpler and perhaps more meaningful. They changed the way they noticed things. They changed the way they stepped toward responsibility instead of away from it. They changed the way they treated the smallest lives around them. And in that subtle shift, a legacy began. Not because of a headline, not because of a speech, but because one man stopped when others didn't, and 2 dogs protected what they loved until someone finally saw them. Red Willow Crossing carried that story, folded it into classrooms, kitchens, church basements, cafe counters, and farm fences, until it became part of the town's quiet spine. A reminder that compassion does not need applause to matter. It only needs someone willing to notice. Evenings in Red Willow Crossing had a way of softening the world, as if the desert itself understood that some hours were meant for quiet. The heat slipped away first, lifting slowly from the earth like a long breath released after holding too much. Then the sky shifted orange, melting into rose gold, then into a shade of purple that looked almost unreal above the low desert ridge. Lucas Merrick sat on the front steps of Red Willow Haven, forearms resting loosely on his knees, watching the day settle into night. He didn't think about where he needed to be next. He didn't brace himself for noise or motion or threat. He simply sat, letting the last warmth of the sun soak into the wood beneath him. Beside him, Maggie lowered herself onto the step with a soft exhale. She held a mason jar of iced tea, condensation trailing down her fingers. "It's the quiet part of the day," she said, her voice low, gentle. "My favorite." Lucas nodded, not because he had always felt that way, but because he had finally learned to. For a long time, quiet had reminded him of deserts far away, quiet that came before something broke. But this quiet felt different. It didn't hide anything. It simply existed. 2 German shepherds settled around them, the way sentries settle without being told. One lay pressed against Lucas's boot, chin nestled into the curve of his ankle with complete trust. The other rested against Maggie's leg, eyes half closed, ears relaxed in a way that would have been impossible months ago. Lucas let his hand drift over the nearest dog's back, feeling the warmth under its fur, the steady breathing that spoke of a life no longer balanced at the edge. "You ever think," Maggie said softly, "about how strange it is that everything started on a road no one pays attention to?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. His eyes were on the horizon, where the sun brushed its final arc into the earth. Most things worth saving, he said. Don't start in places people notice. Maggie smiled, not looking at him, but at the shepherd beside her. Maybe that's why you were the one who found them. He didn't react at first. Compliments, or anything close to them, still felt unfamiliar in his bones. He rubbed the shepherd's ear and let the silence stretch long enough that it became comfortable again. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of sagebrush and cooling sand. Somewhere across the yard, a metal wind chime tapped out a slow, uneven rhythm. The dogs lifted their heads in unison, not alarmed, just aware. Red Willow Haven looked different at dusk. The kennels glowed softly from the warm bulbs Maggie insisted on installing. The gravel paths reflected the sky's purple-blue gradient. The new sign swayed gently in the breeze, a little crooked from settling soil, but charming in its imperfection. Lucas had helped build every inch of it. He hadn't planned to. He hadn't even agreed to stay. He simply never left. There was no ceremony to it. No moment when he declared, "I live here now." He simply woke one morning in the small guest room Maggie cleared out for volunteers, stepped outside, heard the shepherd stretching in the early hush, and realized he wasn't leaving that day. And then the next day came, and the next. Healing had a way of sneaking up on people who weren't expecting it. As the desert cooled, one of the shepherds shifted, leaning more fully into Lucas's side. He steadied the dog with a slow hand, letting his palm rest over its ribs. He felt the strength, they're solid, rhythmic, earned. "They're different now," Maggie murmured. Lucas nodded. They chose to stay alive. Maggie glanced at him. "So did you." He didn't reply, but his jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that her words had landed deeper than he let on. They watched the sun vanish completely then, leaving behind a glow that hovered like an afterthought, one last soft promise before the desert surrendered to night. The wind cooled. The porch boards creaked quietly under shifting weight. The shepherds settled again, both close enough that Lucas felt the rise and fall of their breathing on either side of him. Maggie rested her shoulder lightly against his. No pressure, just presence. No one spoke for a long time. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to fight, nothing left to fear. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had changed, everything that had healed, everything that had found a place to rest. After a while, Lucas let out a slow breath. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "stopping is the bravest thing we do." He didn't say it for effect. He didn't say it for Maggie. He said it because it was the closest thing to truth that had lived with him in years. Truth born from a moment on a blazing highway when he could have driven past and never known what he missed. Maggie didn't break the stillness with an answer. She just let the words hang in the cooling air, resting between them like a settled stone. The sky deepened into twilight. The first star appeared, faint but steady. The shepherds breathed in slow harmony. The wind carried a final sweep of warmth before dipping into night. On the porch of a rescue center built from second chances, 2 people and 2 dogs sat together, facing a horizon that no longer looked like an open wound. The camera, if one were there, would pull back now, slowly, gently. Past the porch rails, past the gravel path, past the wire fence glowing soft under yellow lights. Far enough to see the whole outline. A man who stayed, a woman who fought quietly, 2 dogs who survived by refusing to give up, and a piece of desert that finally held more hope than heat. And then the picture would settle, not with fanfare, but with peace. The kind only hard-won lives ever get to feel. CTA, natural, gentle, irresistible. Have you ever had a moment when you stopped, truly stopped, because someone, human or animal, needed you? A moment others might have walked past? If a memory like that lives somewhere in you, share it in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it.